I'm Greg Olson, Transportation Director. Our connection to the mission, district mission. Changed a little bit over the last few years, but 318 Transportation, along with the rest of 318, continue to improve and better serve our children. We do this by anytime that we have issues, we try to get all parties involved with what's going on, parents, principals, teachers, just to help the students along more, better understand what's going on in their lives. Okay, with collaboration, that's communication, complete dedication. We've made our buses safer. I feel we've made them safer by, being able to find out what's going on in that child's life. A lot of times we'll have situations where we will be forewarned of a child's attitude before they even come to the bus. We continually strive to better serve and understand the needs of our students and staff. Brief narrative, there we are, 49 routes, 49 drivers, 15 sub-drivers, and 2 again in Big Fork, which is great because it's been at least probably, last year we had 1 sub up there, but yeah, it's been tight up there. This will help them a lot. 1 type 3 driver, 4 mechanics, 2 routing specialists. The addition to the routing of the special education routing specialist has been just a wonderful thing. We'll touch on that a little bit further. 1 secretary, 1 director, 603,000, that's to and from school miles. Special education miles are 222,000. Extracurricular trips, quite a few of those too, again, thankfully. Let's see. We are still, our total mileage this year was 935,748. That's still 30,000 shy of pre-pandemic numbers. So we're really getting up there. I would like to see that 95 chartered trips come down, which hopefully will with the addition of staff that we've had coming here. So we've chartered 21 trips so far this year. And we have to charter them when we don't have enough people to cover them.
Greg,
Yeah.
interrupt you. What's the cost difference, charter versus?
I asked myself that and Kristen this afternoon before this meeting, and I didn't get the number. Went up this year quite a bit. It used to be where it was a deadhead fee. I use Shoebot a lot because they're the most reasonable, and it costs $100 just to get them here. And then I want to say it's like probably $2.50, $3 a mile. So it's quite a bit more than us, but not twice as much. But
when we charter, do the charters hold the liability? Or do
I'd say we probably both got liability.
Probably.
They were contracting with them to carry their liability,
Right.
but we still have responsibility as a school district.
yeah,
So in the pecking order of things, if something went sideways, charter school district.
Right, I mean, it would always, but we're not number one. I mean, we're not the deep pocket coming first.
Well-
It's a private institution.
Parents are first.
yeah. I was going to say your auto owner's insurance.
Yeah, auto owners is first.
Regardless of if
Yep.
it's a district or a charter.
Yep.
And then it
I'm not
comes to
too
the-
sure a charter is licensed through the state. That might be a little bit different, but
with us.
with us, it's parents first and then they subrogate back.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
Highlights, indicators of success and challenges. Highlights, we've trained 7 new drivers this year and we've got 2 more in training. That's been wonderful. We continue to retain and hire exceptional staff. I think that's helped. The driver rate has helped the The incentive, the hiring bonus has helped. I also feel like, we just have a good group. We have a family type atmosphere. Some people have driven since 1973. So that's a good thing. Indicators of success, this fall startup was better than ever. And a lot of that is due to the added router helping us out. Busing assignments went out to families earlier in the special education. Usually that first week of school, we're actually scrambling because the special education teachers don't get into school early enough to give us the data. We were able to have that in place. So that was very, very good. Requests were processed quickly. And again, hiring staff in the current environment has been good. Challenges post-COVID. We're dealing with a different type of situation out there with families that are just impacted hard by this 2 years of being jostled around, basically. Roads are more dangerous. There's a lot of distractions. I mean, we all see that every day as we drive. Cell phones, poor driving habits. The other challenge is multiple stop options. A lot of times we have children, they can have 2 different stops that they can go to. It's kind of confusing and unsafe when we expect them to know, but they don't know. So a lot of times it's a situation where we have to call and find out where they're supposed to go, grandma's or mom's or daycare. Let's see. Any questions about that one?
I just want to, Greg and his staff have done a really good job over the last few years of getting that startup thing dialed in. Going from just one measurement of how long it took from, busing notification to having that route done. This year was just so, I've seen improvement every single year. So
Yeah.
Heads off to you, Greg.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
your crew.
Do you have stop arm cameras now?
Yeah,
Thought I saw something on there.
yeah, they're pretty nice. They help us out a lot. Changes, recommendations. Get back to buying buses. That is a huge thing for us. If you think about it, I believe the number is roughly average 16,000 miles a year on a bus. At 10 years, it's 160,000 miles. They add up quick. We're already feeling the impacts of 1 year of not having buses on a rotation like that. So the other thing is just staff. One of the benefits of this fall being so nice, or one of the reasons why we benefited from it, is because we had staff that has been in the seat for a little bit. I mean, we went through a few years there where our router changed, and yeah. And that's probably district-wide, I would imagine, a lot of different people.
Greg, what would it take us to get back on track as far as the purchasing of the buses? How many do we purchase, or how many did we purchase?
Well, it was always a number. I want to say it was 675,000, and then we would just utilize it as much as we could, to fill the buses. The bus cost has gone up a little bit. Let's see. That includes Suburbans too, which the cost has gone up in that too. But otherwise, we would buy seven buses at a time when we could.
What are we down to now
One and a used one this last year.
We purchased one with special ed funds, so that worked out well.
Yeah. And it, I offered it up. I just feel that we need to make sure that we get back in there, get back buying them. That helps the resale of them. If we can get rid of them with 120,000 miles on them versus 150 or more than that. I mean, they really start to show their age. We've got one in our garage that, what is that? That's a little over 10 years old, but trade-in value is $2,000. So it's like, yeah.
How many buses are in our fleet?
70 buses.
And how many Suburban?
I believe it's 11.
So is there a mile point where it started costing you? You hit 100,000 and you can see it on the repair side, is it 70,000, whatever?
I would say 100,000. I don't have that fact. We've never really tracked it. You know, I would imagine what led up to building this rotation, there was numbers there then, but after it started working, it just,
Well, just from my experience, previous experience, it was around 85,000. We could start, the repair costs would go up.
yeah. Yeah.
So it got to that point, all right, let's.
Yeah.
Take it off and make
Yeah.
sure we stay in our rotation. So I was just curious if there's a magical mile there where it starts to go the other way, where it's costing you to repair versus.
Greg, can you say a word, you say do what it takes to retain staff. What does that mean?
I would say keep them happy. You know,
Donuts.
yeah, I buy donuts once a month. I try. I don't know. I guess that's across the board.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
I just had a question too with the 49 routes. Is that consistent with what it's been in the past?
No, it's actually down probably 3
That's what it seemed
routes
like.
pre-pandemic. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's driven by drivers shortage. You know,
Okay.
but with this new influx here, that's one of the goals for next year is to add a couple more routes.
Okay.
That'll decrease ride time,
It's good.
numbers. Yeah.
Are there less kids riding buses now?
I think there probably is because of some of the route consolidation. We have kids that, you know, if they rode the bus, they get on the bus at 6:07 in the morning. You know, so that's pretty early.
It just seems like a lot of parents. Like when I drive to work, there's only like 2 sets of kids that even get on the bus, like if I would drive in.
Yeah.
Which is a lot less than it used to be. So I didn't know if it was just coincidence or if that really is less.
Well, Sunny Beach Road, that's not time driven. That's just convenience driven, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually, there's a few parents usually have Sunny Beach Roaders, and it's like the bus is 5 minutes late, or like so you can kind of see it coming down as
Yeah.
the notifications
Yeah.
come up. But yeah, no,
But no, there are some routes that, like I said, they get on pretty early and they don't live that far away. So yeah, they're gonna get a ride instead.
Do we still do a pickup in Coleraine
Yeah, 2 of them.
too?
Yeah. Yeah. And then we drive through Coleraine, a few different places too. So
Do you have any other pickups out of district?
we have one out of district in Deer River at the junction of 11 and 2. And then we have several in Big Fork. I mean,
Yeah.
we have to go right through
Yeah.
there. So Marcel,
Hill City.
no, that's in district. That's a pickup down
Oh,
there,
okay.
Spang, right at the county line.
Okay.
We want to increase ridership, we're gonna make it a requirement to graduate to get a ride the bus.
yeah, just have the experience, the little
I
experience.
guess it's
Any other questions?
Greg, you instituted laptop.
Yep.
Got an update on?
You know what? They're not as far along as I'd like. The drivers all seem to like them for the most part. Subs say that that's amazing.
Yeah, I've talked to subs who
Yeah.
said the only reason I'm subbing is because
Of that, yeah. It helps me and our team because we can see where the bus is at any given moment. The issue that we're having, we did run a pilot program this summer over summer school to do the sign on, sign off thing, parent notification. We ran into some hiccups there. Right now, the issue that is kind of holding us back a little bit is reception, cell phone type reception, satellite type reception. So we have buses that will be out on their route and they'll just fall off. I'm reaching out to a lot of different districts, find out how that impacts. Last thing I want is all the families on Route 8 to call me and say, hey, you just dropped off all my kids. Where? I mean, that's my
Yeah.
fear and I don't want that to happen. So most people that are in our spot, they're in the metro area, this isn't an issue for them. It's like, yeah. So, but otherwise it's going pretty well, just not as well as it can be.
Good, thank you.
Electric buses? Come on, nobody wants to talk electric buses?
Well, I think it'd be cool, but I think that I'm a little bit afraid of all that stuff with the winter weather.
Yeah.
And I think if you gotta run a bus from 6 AM to, and how many miles you put on that?
Yeah,
you
we
know, I
would-
just can't.
Yeah, we would probably run it on a short route is what we'll do. And we'll apply for one when it comes. My argument has always been just because it's free doesn't mean it's a good idea, because in 10 years when the batteries are no good and it costs $100,000 to replace the batteries,
Right.
yeah, you end up with a big pile of hazardous waste.
Orange,
Yeah.
yellow.
All right.
Do any schools have?
I think there's one coming on, east a little bit. I'm not sure.
Wasabi East,
Wasabi
they
East.
applied for the grant, but it sounds like it was kind of like a lottery. It had nothing to do with need. It had nothing to do with how many you wanted. It was kind of like a few years ago when they had a bunch of that school security money, and they basically gave you a lottery number and they picked names out of a hat. And that's what, so if you needed, if you were a district that got drawn and you needed 30 buses, they might have wiped out all the money. So Wasabi East didn't get any.
Yeah, Minnesota in general didn't get a lot of them. Red Lake has, I think they've got a couple, awarded a couple of them. So we'll be watching them.
That's a good
Oh,
one.
yeah, that'd be a good one.
Yeah.
for-
Yeah, that'd be a lot like us.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm gonna
Thanks,
leave
Greg.
if you don't mind. Thank you. Pat, you busy Friday?
Got a sub job for you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
All right, moving on to 4B, strategic planning update. Matt?
All right, I shared some of this with you ahead of time, but I just wanted to give you a sense of where we're at in the process. It's taken a long time, a lot longer than I kind of expected or hoped or wanted it to. So from how did we get here and where are we? This started last year. We gathered input from the community and from staff. And so this first part was the part that Ed and Laura were involved in. Again, because they're the most familiar with their communities. So they did a community survey that we had, I think, over 800 responses to. They went out to the buildings, met with staff, gathered data with staff. They did interviews with students. They did focus groups. They interviewed, I think they had a couple focus groups made up of exclusively Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Talked to alumni. They did a really good job gathering information. Even Dan Hoverman, who sort of picked up the ball then after Dan and Laura, or Ed and Laura had done their part. Dan has made a couple comments just about how good and thorough of a job Ed and Laura did. So I feel like we've got some good information we're working off of. So that was gathering data. Then we had a group that met to take a look at all that, the report, if you remember that big long report that Ed and Laura put together, that took a look at that to see what sort of themes emerged. And in the model we're using, those are called strategic directions. And I might have shared those before with you, but in the packet that I gave you or had uploaded, those showed up. So those are the themes, and that's what we're going to be organizing our work around. I shared those with staff this fall at the opening workshop and asked to get some feedback on those directions from staff again via a thought exchange. Made some tweaks to those based on that. And then we had a discussion looking at this dynamic or this gap between what we're doing now and what we want to be doing. And so out of that emerged this end in view document that I kind of included that sort of puts out there, where do we want to be or what do we want it to look like in a few years? And then planning backwards from that, the operational plan essentially is what are the steps that we need to take to get there? And, Dan's been very, very helpful with that. He's also been trying to set some realistic expectations. He said some of your action steps are just going to be gathering the data you need in order to take the steps you need to take. So the first strategic direction, and these aren't necessarily in order, a culture of trust, engagement, and belonging. This lays out again, what do we want for our students? What do we want for our staff? Carol and I just talked today about employees feeling known and supported. So again, eventually we'll be talking about, well, what does that look like and what steps can we take to get there? One of the other things that we've talked about are expectations of each other. And one of the things I think I've learned, and people smarter than me have shared with me, is that when expectations are mismatched, that's when conflict sort of just comes right on in. So what are those expectations? And then customer service mindset. I think Greg's a good example of that. You know, a few years ago, we had weeks between when a parent requested transportation and when a parent got transportation, and that's down to days now. So they've done a really good job of sort of working on that customer service piece. And some of that was an intentional decision by the board to put this special ed routing specialist in place that could help. I mean, funded through SPED, of course, but really sort of take that burden and help out in the office, which has helped out a lot. So this is one of the strategic directions. Another one is equitable access, representation, and outcomes. This is just ensuring that kids are getting what they need regardless of, their zip code, who they are, what they look like, that we're thinking about, we're not having to problem solve systems after they're built, but that we're designing systems without barriers in them in the first place. Making sure that we have representation that's proportionate in our programs, whether that's an academic program like International Baccalaureate, forces us to ask questions like, how many kids of color are in that program? How many girls are in that program? How many kids free or reduced are in that program? Is that proportionate? If it isn't, why isn't it? And if it isn't, what can we do to be intentional about it? Same thing with our participation in activities. One of the things that came up, it was really cool relative to this. We have a group of students. It's really our FFA group that's been meeting with some students from the Minneapolis School for the Recording Arts. And the idea has been that we were approached to sort of engage kids in this, to have some kids from an urban school talk to kids from a rural school, identify a common issue that they could work on together. And what our kids are sort of identifying after looking at data and all this stuff is that student mental health is an issue that they're sharing. Now, what that looks like there and here is sometimes different, but one of the things that our kids are talking about is how important it is, back to this one, the top, students feeling a strong sense of belonging, is, are our kids engaged in school? Are they connected to people? Are they connected to a community? And what does that look like? And so out of that came this idea of, well, do we have kids that aren't participating because they can't get home? And so what would it look like to run activity buses as a solution? And again, do we have students right now that are not participating in sports or other activities because they can't get home? Without having the data in front of me, it'd be hard for me to say anything other than yes, we do. So we need to know that for sure before we step into that. But again, those are the kinds of things that we want to be talking about if we're going to make things equitable. I think we have our own learning around race that we need to work on, and equity that we need to work on as a school district, so that students feel good about being here. And then I think a part of this is also our staff demographics and what that looks like, and do students see themselves here? Evidence-based practices and student-centered learning. What things are happening in the classroom that we're going to agree should be everywhere, and what things are those things in classrooms that really the teachers have autonomy over, or that staff have autonomy. But there are practices we know are good, and we should agree on what things we can expect from each other. Again, this is back to that expectations thing. Decreasing variability. One of the things I talk about with the principals is, as a superintendent, I should be able to go like room to room and know I'm in the same district. That doesn't mean there are people doing the exact same thing from classroom to classroom, but I should know I'm in the same district. And I've had some experiences with that recently, which have been really great, where I was in a classroom right next door, same grade level. The two teachers were doing very, very similar activities. You could tell that they had spent time planning. You could tell that the kids, if you had a kid that was going to that school, it wouldn't matter which teacher your kid had. They were going to be learning pretty much the same things. And so that is important. And there's research around this notion that there is as much variability that exists within districts as there is from district to district. And that's something we need to work on. This also gets into student voice. What do students want here, especially at the high school? Like, what do they want their experience to look like? Are they getting something that looks like that? This doesn't necessarily mean that we give a kid a blank sheet of paper and say, develop your own personal learning plan necessarily, but are we listening to what they want? At some point, kids can vote with their feet when it comes to scheduling time. And so we see that, but how do we work with students and learn and listen to what they want? And then are we providing professional development around those practices that our teaching staff and our principals know are important and good? The next strategic direction is about partnerships and collaboration. Do we have clarity? Are they well defined? Do we have good relationships? One of the things that I remember about this conversation, Dan, again, the guy who's helping us with this, said, what are your partnerships like internally? You got to have good partnerships internally. So what is the relationship like between the bargaining units and the management? What's happening there? One of the things that we became aware of in the last few months is family engagement model that MDE has out there that I think is really, really good. And it'll be interesting now that the commissioner of the Department of Ed is saying, I'm not going to be back. So it'll be interesting to see when that change happens, what happens to MDE. But as I can say, as a superintendent, I've never felt more like MDE was actually being useful to us as districts as I felt now. They're putting together things that are actually useful. The training that they've been providing some of our staff around multi-tiered systems of support is really, really good. And it's been a long time since I've been able to say that what they're giving us is really, really good.
Or giving to you.
Yeah. Or that too. They say,
Yeah.
here, do this. And
Yeah.
it's like, what? So what does it mean to engage our families? And how do we move towards a model that's more about that engagement rather than, or maybe a better way to say it is, how do we move beyond seeing family fun nights as the way to engage families? What's more? What can we do more than that? Communication. There probably should never be a strategic plan that doesn't have communication as a part of it. I know it's something that comes up all the time, came up today when we were talking. So we have to have that hammered out. And hopefully you're seeing some alignment between things we're talking about, working on already with some of this work, but it shouldn't be all new. The last one is stewardship of resources. What are we doing with the things that are entrusted to us? That's people, that's time, that's money, that's facilities. How are we using data to make decisions around those things? So that's sort of the end in view piece. And then if you go down to the bottom, this operational plan, this last of the 5 steps, that's where we are right now. So what are those action steps that we can put in place that lead us towards these bullets, knowing that, there's kind of a short term and then a longer term plan towards these. And again, some of the work up front is, Dan reminded us, just if you don't have data around these things, you're gonna have to get data around these things. How known and supported do our staff feel? Do we know that? If we don't know that, one of our first steps is gonna be, how do we figure out how to know that? Before we can actually figure out how to do that. Comments or questions on this piece?
That was kind of my next question, though, is how are you going to even begin? It's a lot.
Mhm.
It's, it's huge. This is more of a 5-year strategic plan, I think. I mean, really, how are you even going to begin? Have you identified ways in which you can measure movement on each one of these?
Yeah.
So that it doesn't seem so big, but like you can kind of hone in on one thing around, one or two things around each one of those bullets, because that's a lot to carry.
Yep. So if you look at the last page in your packet, you'll see kind of a typical planning document, but this is really how we're going to articulate what it is we're working on and how we track that. We'll come up with between 1 and 3 goals in one of these areas. We'll talk about action steps in each of those areas. And then who's responsible, what data, what evidence do we need there to prove that we're making progress? Who needs to know? How do we know that they know? What's our timeline for that? Knowing that some of these are going to be shorter term and some of them are going to be longer term.
When you say we, I'm just
Yeah.
gonna be picky, right?
So yeah,
When you say we, and I know some of these are external goals, right? They're about families, they're about students.
Mhm.
Are you going to be talking to some of them as you're developing these pieces?
yeah. So I think the first step or the first action items are going to be developed. I've got a meeting set up over the break with some of the district level, like Ryan, myself, Anna, kind of district level directors around specific action steps. But as we move into the family engagement's a really good one. Once we've taken a step towards that, we're going to need to involve people in the actual work.
Even staff of color, like as we start,
Right.
yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
So is there a timeline on this map, map in regards to getting this developed on paper? I
Yeah.
realize the work has to begin.
Yeah.
But once it's developed on paper, that's really when the work begins. But
Yeah.
what's the timeline as far as getting everything identified and categorized?
Well, back to like the 18 things we have working on that we need to do as a district over the next year, or whatever the number is, this is an important one of those, right? Because ultimately, if we're going to be talking to the community about what we aspire to be, we want to be able to come back to something like this and point to it and say, this is what you want to be more like. We're going to need more resources to do that. So by the end of January, I'm hoping that you have a draft to look at.
Matt, can you say a bit more about communication? I know you have really been a warrior out there on Facebook and doing interviews tonight, and that's really good. That's one slice of the pie. As a school district.
Yeah, so when Jessica left, we talked about what we were doing that we needed to quit doing, what we needed to do that we were going to keep doing, and so some of those things we've kept. So like we had a staff newsletter that went out last week. That's just something we kept doing. We just are having to do it way different now. So Julie's done a good job and Melanie's done a good job of like wrangling information, and Melanie's staff. We have a community one or a parent one that we do similarly. So we're gathering it. So the work's having to get shared a lot more. But we're trying to keep those things that we can keep right now. One of the goals that is in here, one of the goals that's on the board goals for the year is this communications plan. It's probably about half done now. Part of that will be what are we doing, when are we doing it, who's doing it, including what the board's responsible for. So, do we go back to the coffee and conversation, adding that back in? It seemed like it was a pretty positive practice before, so kind of like that.
Thank you.
You're gonna need a budget for these things and not
Mhm,
a dedicated budget.
mhm,
You've been thinking about that?
mhm. Yep.
Say that again, Ben, I didn't hear.
A dedicated budget for strategic planning.
Yeah, that's an important role for the board to play too, is supporting the work of this plan. And some of it's embedded in what we're doing, but part of it might require some specific funds to put towards some of these things.
Because it comes up, well, where do you get the money for this and that? And I don't have a problem with that. It's just, we should be open with that and say, this is as important as other things.
And to that point, I think it allows us to have the conversation of, well, then this is something we can't do now.
Right,
And
what
we
things
can
we're gonna
remove
quit
it.
doing.
You know, I mean, if it's too costly, you know, and it's one of those things where if we're making cuts and what is it then that we can cut? And I think those are healthy conversations.
Anything else?
I don't want to jump ahead, but how does this tie into the next piece on the agenda?
I think it ties in a bunch. Kind of like I said, if we're gonna be out talking about resources, I think part of what our community is gonna wanna know is, well, what are we gonna get for that? Right? And
Yeah,
what do
that
you
was
do
one of
with
the
it?
main questions I think that staff asked.
Right.
In the panel.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so what do we get?
What are we gonna get for that? And I think this is part of articulating what it is that they're gonna get for that. And some of this, you know, how do I say this? Well, so one of the things I talked to Dan about when I was going through this stuff, there's nothing in here that sounds like super forward leaning or innovative, right? Like there's nothing in here about putting a man on the moon. And Dan made an interesting comment. He talked about, you know, let's focus on the school district getting really good at improving before it starts to work on innovating. And I thought that was super, super, super insightful. I don't think there's going to be anything in this plan that's going to sound, or what we're working on in the next few years, that's like super sexy. And I don't think we need to. I think we have really, really good people in positions that are important. I think we have really, really good people in classrooms and doing other things. I think if we get really, really good at doing what we, you know, are there for, it'll be a different place. It'll feel different to kids. It'll feel different to families. It'll feel different to staff. And I think that's what will end up mattering. But there's not going to be like a super sexy thing in here unless we, you know, in part of the referendum conversation, we're talking about adding things back that we had to cut, right? Like, so if we're talking about art at the elementary, which could be something that our community wants back, the way that they had it before. That might be something that shows up in a second question. Or if there's some other program that's extra, it needs to show up in a second question. But the first question is going to be about how do we just get good at the basics in a sense, or how do we get back to good?
And communicate it to the public.
Mhm.
There's so much misperception and miscommunication.
Mhm.
We're in a real deficit there.
But I think part of it is, you know, prior to now, prior to January, whatever, we'd be asking the community for support without any kind of pillars out there that we've identified as, these are the things that we're really gonna get behind. So I feel like we're gonna be in a better position to talk about getting support when we're able to be more explicit about what it is that we're asking them to get behind.
Cambridge and Sandy had a really good communication plan,
Yeah, they did.
and they were very, very specific about what that referendum would buy them.
Right.
You know, advanced programming and
Mhm.
tech courses.
Hire and retaining teachers, right? That was
Yeah.
about class sizes.
And they hit that message over and over.
So is there data gathering then that we can do then that feeds that communication plan? That aligns both with the strategies that we're implementing and that feeds the communication plan outward? Are there some threads there that we can pull? Because I think David's right. I think one of the things I find most interesting is most parents don't even know what we teach. Like they don't know that we still even have stuff. And we've been doing a better job in the last year or so, but they don't understand that, there's forestry and there's, they have no knowledge of it. And,
Money matters.
money matters is a huge one. Like, why aren't my kids, it's required.
Yeah.
Like, it's a required course and your kids just graduated. I know, because they're, it's my nephew.
Yeah.
And so it's that kind of stuff. It almost seems like keep it simple, stupid kind of thing. Kiss it, like keep it, just kiss it. Seems like if we could really dial that stuff in and talk about, here's all the cool things we already do. Here's the really talented staff that are delivering it. So it's not necessarily me delivering that message. I mean, I don't mind doing it, but the staff are really good and they're passionate about what they do. How do we make them the spokespeople? Like rather than, because if everybody's a leader in this, right? If everybody's a voice and leader, how do we share ownership in this messaging? That's,
A lot of our really strong programs are great communicators.
yeah,
Take the band, for example. You know, the community knows exactly what they're doing.
right. You're right.
But they're out there performing in the community, so the community has participation in it, right? Different than the classroom aspect of the good things that are happening in the classroom.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that out in the community enough, in my opinion, of what's actually going on in the classroom.
Right.
I'm gonna throw this question out, and I'm gonna go back to C on here. Can this and the operating referendum run parallel with one another? Because that's what it feels like we're gonna be doing. Is there a benefit to that, or does it make sense to work through this, get this cemented, and then come back around and use this to help us in our communication in regards to the referendum? Would this be useful to us in communication in regards to the referendum? I don't know the answer to that, but it just, to me, this and a referendum, all in the same year, that's a lot. And this itself is a lot. And I told some of you I don't like to lose. And my mind's on
who does,
referendum.
Matt?
So everything that we do, in my
Has to
mind, is
align and-
it has to align and it has to make sense for the end goal. So I just throw that out there now, and I don't know if there's an answer here for that tonight. I think it's something we need to sit on and give it some thought. And I realize every day that goes by is a day lost, so to speak. Before you know it, November's here. And looking back, and Mindy, you've been through this, we all kind of been through this in a referendum aspect of it.
I think
If we
some
don't
of
tell the
these,
story, I'm sorry, go ahead.
with that in mind, you could take each one of these 5 items and pick 1 or 2 items that could pertain to a referendum.
Mhm.
The others are more mechanical,
Sure.
internal type things. So example, the customer service mindset with interactions with families, public, and within the district. What's in it for me? You know, whether it's a staff, grandpa, the kids, and frame our needs around those types of things that we can identify and at least get traction on.
It'll always be in the back of my mind that our kids are at a financial, educational disability
Right.
without that referendum.
Yep.
And if we need to do the strategic planning first, we do, but we need to get it done. Because I don't think we can sit and wait for a long time.
Agreed.
I think when we look at the strategic plan, one of the key things for me is rural is an equity issue. Rural funding is a state equity issue. Rural people have been at a disadvantage for decades, if not centuries, right? And so it's an opportunity for us to give kids a fighting chance when other districts are overfunded. I mean, they are just funded at a higher level. It's kind of one of those where I think we're gonna have to beat the drum, and the reality is the representatives in our district may not align with the same messaging that we're sending out, so ours should be solid. We have to have it solid. If we're gonna say it, we need to know what are the numbers and where is the data coming.
Yeah.
But it's an equity issue, I agree with you. And the longer we wait, the longer that inequity continues.
Correct.
And you can't get it back, right? You can't get it back. If you lose a raise one year, you can't get it back.
Right.
Like you can never rebuild that 1%.
And I agree with you that some of the representatives, because we have quite a few now with
We do.
redistricting and
Right.
stuff,
Right,
they're not all Democratic. And I don't think we can depend on them. Oh, 318, go.
Right.
It's-
Oh,
Well, the other thing that's interesting, if you look at kind of how these committee leaders are gonna shake out, there's no rural people in
None.
committee leadership.
Nope.
When I had this like aha moment where it's like, well, of course there aren't any rural leaders on the committees in the legislature because there were barely any Democrats that won in rural,
Outstate, yeah.
outstate. So there were hardly any Democrats to put on that in those leadership spots unless they were brand new. So it's an interesting dynamic.
it is interesting because Grand Rapids is often seen not as rural.
Mhm.
So we have another disadvantage
Mhm.
in that sense, that we're often not seen as rural,
Mhm.
in rural,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's another disadvantage.
Can I share?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
so the reason I wanted to stay tonight was because this was on the agenda. And I know Matt and I are gonna talk about this with Joe from Ed, Minnesota, but this is also a perfect storm. And you mentioned, the referendum and you don't wanna lose. And you mentioned these, which I think is important, but we also have to remember that we're entering into a negotiation too. So this is a perfect storm of all the things that need to go right. And so I think having these things in place is important. I think us working on the communication with our staff is important. But I think everyone at this table knows if we don't have 318's teachers on board with this referendum's not going anywhere. And they know that, and we've had this conversation. And so, I think you all having that discussion too, heading into negotiations with, what does that look like? And we know where we're at as far as money, but still, you've got teachers who are feeling like they've given, and now we've got insurance, we throw insurance on that too. And so, and I know you're all aware of that, but I just want to be at the table to say, that's there too. And I don't think, Mark, you have a great point. I mean, right, the money, we need that for the kids, and we are underfunded compared to the cities, and it's wrong. I had exactly 1.1 minute to speak with the governor when he was in town, and that was what I mentioned to him, is that our funding is not the same as in the metro area, and that's wrong, and that needs to be fixed, and we know that. And we also shouldn't have to do a referendum to fix that. I mean, that is what it is. Another, coming from the teachers is we are going to be down there fighting for that money. And I guess our question too is the board and our administrators, and what is that gonna look like? Because we want you right along with us, fighting for that money or a piece of that money to come back up here.
And I mean, from the experience with the elementary school bond referendum, 2018, I think that was, 4 years ago. I mean, Kent Corbett and I literally decided right away that we had to start talking to the teachers first. I mean, we went to every single school to talk to them and listen to them. And, you know, we learned a ton by doing that. And then we had to go to the community and we had to start hitting community groups and explaining that to them. So, I mean, at this point, you know, it's December, it's less than a year out. I mean, you kind of have to be strategic about thinking about how that's going to roll out. I mean, I think this is a really important thing. I think that structure and the systems to do all these things need to be in place because we can always rely back on those things. And so if we get that in place and we get kind of a system moving forward, then we can kind of put the referendum stuff into those and start working on those because those will be our first big communication thing.
I just have a question about that last one. Was Minnesota, did they help with the bond referendum for the schools?
Yes. They, you know, they would come and they'd give us a bunch of computers
Okay.
and a bunch of
Like
information.
call
on how-
center kind of
Yes.
stuff. So I do know, and we've had this conversation, Matt, but Minnesota has a lot of money to back us as far as a referendum. They helped Chisholm just get theirs. They helped Nashwauk with theirs and working on that. So that's another piece that we can help bring to the table. And just a suggestion from us, and we know we haven't started negotiations yet, but that we need a positive settled contract before starting to work with, you know, so as we're talking to teachers coming back, if we're still sitting at the table in September and we go into you know, if we, God forbid, had to do that again, then that's not a positive place. So we need to maybe have a goal that we're gonna settle and be ready to go before the teachers even come back.
So how soon can we start?
I'm ready today. We have a training in January, so I don't think I know historically they've waited till the summer. And so those of you I guess, are the historian. We will be ready in the spring.
I think there's some sort of a requirement or limitation that you can't start more than 90 days before
The end of
the end of the current
Yeah.
contract. So that's what pushes you like April 1st.
into
is kind
spring.
of
And
the-
our goal is we want to sit and listen to all the people too. We kind of have a plan for that. But
Can you do those things like listening and can you have like listening sessions before? So you
Yeah,
can
I
start
think-
doing some of those.
Yeah. I can't, let's see, I don't think I can, well, maybe I can. I haven't shared. I
So
haven't-
April 1st is the soonest we could start negotiations. Do we have some expectations, say that everybody, when I say everybody, teachers and administration have all whatever needs to be done prior to April 1st, and April 1st comes, we can get to the table?
That's how it should be.
I can say yes, but I don't know what all
Well, I
the other stuff
understand.
is behind that, right?
I think that would
stop
be,
sharing.
at least
You
we
missed
can go
that
back
part.
and look
No,
at
it's okay.
calendars, you know, Casey's not here, and she would be a huge
Yeah.
player in that. But yeah.
Well, and we get so we are voting. We actually have 8 people. We never have people who are interested, and we have 8 people for 5 spots. And I am an at-large spot, so I mean, so we have 8 people who are running, and we're voting on Thursday. Now, no, the day before break, we're voting, and so we'll have our team in place. We have a training in January,
This is your negotiation.
our negotiation group, and then we'll be ready to go. I mean, we'll have our team together. I'm not messing around here.
So Matt, in thinking about the operating referendum, like a preliminary discussion, and I know you've done some research just because we've had some conversation on organizations who can help us with the referendum.
Yeah.
And so in thinking about that and knowing where we're at in the strategic plan, do they take that into consideration when they create their plan?
Yeah.
That's, you know, kind of like, can they marry these for us?
Yeah, I can jump ahead, but what I'll talk about in a little bit is a couple firms that I've talked to about these items. And yes, part of what they would strategize is our communications kind of our communications approach. And so they would use our strategic plan as part of that communications approach. I asked them both, like, how well do you work with admin? And both of them are like, got to have them on board. I'll be
Right.
having dinner with the admin elections person the night of MSBA. Like, I mean, there are these stacking things that I think we have to think about, right? Like, and it's all statistics. It's the probability of winning an election in an odd year is like 18% higher than in an even year. You stack that on when admin is involved, the probability goes up by X percent. When you do a poll of the community and take the recommendation of that poll, the probability goes up by X percent. And I think these things all stack on top of each other. And to the best, I think, of our ability, we just have to put as many of those things as we can in our favor, knowing that, at the end of the day, it's still going to be challenging. But I don't see a reason why we can't get the strategic plan to a point we need it to be that provides us the language we need to get out there in our community for a referendum, because the probability of if we wait another year, we're stacked. We've just unstacked this deck for us. We've taken the 16 and 18% and tossed that out. Not that we can't and we couldn't still win. It's just, if we don't like to lose, I think we've got to have as many of those things stacked up for us as we can.
Well, my comment to that is, Matt, let's make sure we have the resources in place that we need to get done,
Yeah.
when we need to get it done. If
Yeah.
all that makes sense, right? It's an investment, and if we need to invest on the front end to get a better result on the end game, we need to do that. And I think we need to identify that, whatever that is, and make sure we got the resources in place, whether that's financial, whether that's people, whatever it's communication, whatever it is. And again, my comment, there's a lot on the plate here, a lot of moving parts, right, for an end game. And we gotta be strategic about it and make sure that we got the Ts crossed and the Is dotted, and our message is out there on what we're looking for and what we want to give the kids, whatever that message is. Because if we don't put the positive spin on it, who's gonna do it?
Yeah.
Put the spin on it, and it's not necessarily gonna be in our favor.
If we can't get this to work, that's okay. I'm sharing something that I put together that gets at some of the, this dynamic that we have going on, that Carol was kind of talking about a little bit. There we go. So I'll read these since it's probably too small, but we have negotiations with all of our bargaining groups. We have health insurance change we're talking about. We have a budget deficit. We have an operating referendum in play. We have a $17.6 billion state surplus. The Democrats, trifecta in St. Paul. The timing of the work that they have to do, they don't have to be done with their work till the end of May. How our employees are feeling about things, the culture, public perception, like all of these things are in play all at once. And there's more on here that I probably didn't put on here. And we have to 10 ring this thing. We got to put it right there. And they're all dependent on one another. How we do how negotiations go is impacted by this health insurance thing. It's impacted by the budget surplus. It's impacted by culture. All these things impact each other. And we have to kind of simultaneously run this thing right down the middle. It's kind of awesome, actually. In a twisted kind of way.
Kind of looks like a target.
Oh, it is a target. We got to.
Is that the superintendent sitting there?
Yeah, right, maybe.
Timeline
Yeah.
and who's involved and who's leading. I mean, that's really now my
Yeah.
planning
Yeah,
brain starts,
yeah,
right?
yep.
It's like, who's leading, what part, what's the timeline, how do we keep them,
Mhm.
if one goes off track, how does that?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like threading the needle,
Yeah.
right? It's like
Yeah.
those movies like in Star Wars where
Yeah.
they took the thing.
Yes,
and-
yes.
But
They
that's
drop it right on there.
right. And so it is threading the needle, and some of it is, not more important, but I mean, it's the way certain things go.
Yeah.
Although I do like what you said, that you might have to front end some things to
Yep.
know that you're gonna get it on the back end. I like to hear that.
Yep.
But, yeah,
So I just thought I'd share that with you.
Because we don't want to
Something
spend the
to think-
money twice, right?
good-
Right.
I mean,
good
that's the other
graphic.
piece is it's still cheaper to do it right the first time.
Yeah.
Than get it wrong and then have to do it another time. It's still cheaper.
And the consequences too, and the thing with the operating referendum, and we'll just come back to that. Passing that in November of '23 gives us the authority to levy in '24, which means we don't really start seeing money, like.
Yeah.
It's not like the next day the money starts rolling in.
And that's probably another communication piece,
Mhm.
right? Because a lot of people aren't gonna understand
Right,
that. And they're
Yeah.
gonna think, when that passes, then that, why
Yeah.
aren't we getting,
Why
why did
aren't
we
we-
add that back? Why did, and it's
Right.
like, well, the money hasn't started to come in.
It's really 2 years old
Right.
from the passing of it.
Well, and I also think it's important because some people think that they could maybe vote no this time because they can vote yes again, not realizing that it's gonna just put it
Yeah.
2,
Right.
3, 4 years out.
and we have had questions of what if the state surplus comes through? And then why do we need the referendum? And again, it's the same thing, it's the timelines, it's all of
Right.
those things, and these things are all going to happen.
Well, and technically, we're still not balanced. So even if the
Right.
state funding
Right.
comes,
Yep.
we're not, all that does is it puts us
We're-
at zero. It
We're
doesn't
still
give us
behind.
any extra.
If
Yeah, if
Right.
that, we might be at zero where we wouldn't have to do any cuts. Maybe.
Yep.
But the reality is that might put us on even playing field, but it doesn't give us any additional items or bring back anything.
Yeah, it creates a net zero maybe for us, but in terms of putting us on an even playing field, when you look at those metro districts, and it's like, I don't want to be the watching other people's bobbers, but when we're comparing ourselves to districts in the metro that have $1,600, $1,800 referendum, that's $8 million more dollars in revenue that they have to operate with than we do. Well, what does that look like? What does that look like for our kids?
Well, for me, it's still about the kids, right? I mean, it still is. If my kid doesn't have access to the same languages that that kid in Wayzata does, or Edina, or name it,
Mhm.
then they don't have the same
Right.
opportunity when they have to go to a college or a 2-year institution or apply for a job. I mean, every little thing matters.
And the beautiful thing about where we are and with the referendum, if we run it, is that we have 2 years left of COVID money that we can use for our operations. After that, it's out and we're using it right now to supplement our operations, not cutting as much. When that runs out, we have nothing. Then if this doesn't pass, then we're cutting for real. Like, as much as it's hurt the last 2 years, it's gonna be so much worse.
And that's another communication point, because people aren't probably realizing that we're still gonna be operating with COVID funds for the next 2 years and are assuming, we survived this, it'll be fine, not realizing it's gonna get much worse.
And Matt, they did a nice job in the conversation that they had today that'll go out around the COVID funding and how that, a lot of people are asking questions about it, but really it's going so that we don't have as many cuts. So it's kind of being spread out as opposed to making like a one-time purchase of like, I don't know, iPads or whatever, that it's going to help keep staff so that we keep classes down and we keep, buses running, we keep whatever that might be.
Our approach to using COVID money has saved jobs. That's 100% the case.
I'm
So,
just gonna make one comment in regards to the state and the surplus. Let's not bank on that.
No.
It seems like when there's more money down there, there's more trouble down there.
yeah,
So, where we're at is where we're at, and whatever we get is a bonus.
Yeah, don't wait for the end of May.
Yeah.
so one of the guys that I was talking to about referendum help and that kind of thing, Todd Rapp, who we've worked with before here in 318, he gets paid to have a handle on what happens in St. Paul and that kind of stuff. And I asked him about it. And he said, I wrote it down because I thought it was good. He said, "We will see an incomplete solution that people brag about." And I thought that was so insightful.
Yep.
Yeah. So I agree. And we said that Carol and I both said that, I think, in our video today, like we can't count, it's not going to save the day.
No, and so I had a phone call from a teacher this morning who wanted to talk about cuts and whatnot and being transparent. And I said, it doesn't matter if we get money from the state, if it doesn't matter if we do this referendum, there are still cuts coming this spring. So please be very aware. I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything. It is still coming. The level of what's going to happen is going to depend on what kind of magic Kara can work. But it's still going to happen, and making sure people are aware of that. And that's not just sugar-coated.
Yeah. Into the kind of the referendum conversation, part of the reason why I wanted to put this on the agenda today is just because of the effort that goes into this type of thing, and whether it's, Matt, pull the reins back and just sit tight until we tell you to go, or Matt, just keep working on this and plugging away. So again, the reason why we're here, there's all kinds of reasons. These are probably 8 or 9 of them. Our revenue isn't what it needs to be in order for us to do what we need to do, and our ability to affect that revenue is really minimal. To Ben's point, our operational plan is going to require some resources. So, and these reductions are impacting class sizes, opportunities, and employee well-being. All 3 really, really important things. The new number, I think, that first bullet, the new number around, if they would have left inflation as part of our basic formula, is over $5 million, right? It's $5.4 million in revenue we would have if they would have given us or left the formula alone in 2003, if they would have left it tied to inflation. We're not even, the conversation tonight's pretty quick, if that was the case.
Is that the same time as like No Child Left Behind, Plenty Held Back the Dollars? Is that same timing that 2003?
03 was, I think, Jesse Ventura.
Yep.
I mean, not that we could imagine
I
anything bad would
know,
happen. He
but
was
there was like this whole thing, like it was
Yeah.
kind of like a trifecta of
right after
bad.
that. This was right
Like that
after that.
happened, and I kind of remember it.
Yeah. This was right after that. So, in terms of a possible timeline, and this is just like a sketch. It's this, there's the napkin and then there's this. Talking to PR and referendum strategy people now, gathering information, gathering data, like Melissa talked about, getting task force together, late winter, early spring, information and input meetings later in spring, getting the campaign going. June is when that board decision happens about how long, how much, when, inflation factor. July, the ballot question gets designed by the bond attorneys. Campaign, an election if we were going to run this in November. This is like at a really high level of what this looks like. And this is based on the conversations I had with these 2 PR companies I'll talk about in a second. The decisions back to June, and our finance committee has talked about these. We looked at some data around who's passing what in what dollar amount ranges. That's obviously a factor. And what we heard in Cambridge, from Cambridge ISD, which there are a ton of really good parallels with the Cambridge ISD election in 2021. They're a little bit bigger than us, but I think their community dynamics are similar to us in a variety of ways. They had done a bunch of cuts. I think they had cut 100 jobs coming into that election. Percentage-wise, probably close. They ended up asking for an amount that they needed to get by. It wasn't the amount that they knew they needed.
Right.
And the superintendent was very open about it. He said, when we first went out in 2020, we asked for this amount, and because we were thinking we were gonna ask once and be done, and that number wasn't gonna work. Tell me if I'm remembering this wrong, but it was more like, we gotta hit the spot we think we can pass, and again, that's another one of those stacking things. We gotta ask for what we think we can pass, and just make that work for a while. And then if we need to ask for more later, we can. And that plays into that duration question, where, you know, do you run a 10-year one and then you're kind of like, we're stuck with that? Or do you run something shorter where if in a few years you need a little bit more, you can get it? So these are decisions that have to be ultimately decided on by the board. The third one is, do you build in the inflation factor, which is really, really important. If you don't put that in there, the amount of money that you have to spend in real dollars is going down every year. So I'll just tell you right now, my recommendation will be that we include it, but it's not my decision.
So Matt, if the state puts an inflation factor back in on the pupil unit, would we need an inflation factor here?
Because it's a separate funding source.
Yep.
And.
I don't think the state will put that back in though. The inflation factor on the formula.
I don't.
I would love to see it, but it's a long shot.
It's being talked about.
Yeah.
I just
It's good
throw it out
question.
there. If it does, or if it is,
It would be great.
does it have an impact on us on?
It might change the discussion on the sense of what can we pass,
Right.
right? I
Right.
mean, because really, if we look back even at our own referendum, I know we probably could have passed one turf, but we went out and like, we're just gonna throw a Hail Mary and we're asking for, and we should not, like, when that came, I went, "Ooh." Like, I mean, it was like, really, that's a recommendation? And we couldn't pass it because everybody's like, really? Like, you couldn't just ask for one, you had to, you know, and it was like, it was just that over the top
Sure.
factor, especially for rural practical people, like it just doesn't go.
Too big of a bite of the apple.
Yeah, not that it wasn't needed, again, not that it wasn't needed or wouldn't be utilized, it was just what will pass.
Yep.
And I think it looks different.
The thing about the inflation factor on the gen ed is that doesn't cover all our expenses. And these, that doesn't cover all our expenses.
Yeah.
So with expenses going up across the board, we need that inflation factor in anywhere we can get it, because we need that revenue to keep up with our expenses, which you guys know right now, we're at like second behind where we need to be. So it's really important in auditing schools, seeing that inflation factor, seeing it save some of these schools, the amount. It's just something that we would be crazy, especially after this year that we're experiencing right now, to not put in there.
So that's June. So I had two conversations with some organizations, companies that do work with school districts around operating referendums. The first one I mentioned earlier, Todd Rapp from Rapp Strategies. His company's done 85 elections over the last how many ever years. He worked with our city and our county. He's worked with us. He's worked with Deer River. He's worked with Nashwauk. So he's familiar with our area. Yeah. And so I talked to him. I also talked to Daler PR, which is who we met at MREA. They worked with Chisholm on theirs. They had a lot of good things to say as well. I think that either one of these companies could do a good job. And again, they don't just, they don't just get into the, here's what your ballot question looks like. It's a comprehensive plan of, here's what we're doing when, here's how we work with your Vote Yes committee, here's kind of some sketched out agendas maybe. We're gonna involve admin this way, we're gonna create communication materials, I think, like I said, I think either one of these would be good to work with. I think with Todd Rapp, you get one thing. I think with Daler, you get some other things. Daler, I think, is sort of more They make their they make their mark with rural school districts and feel very personal. I think with RAP, you get somebody that does know our community already, kind of has some whiskers, and maybe access to resources in the cities. So I think either one of these would be good. But these are the kind of people I think we need to be working with to help tie these things together and map out our plan over the next 11 months, 12 months. Both of them said that, you could wait till June, but starting in January would be better. And you're not behind if you start in January, but you don't want to sit around either. So I don't know if there's some more vetting. I kind of wanted to get a feel for both of these companies to see if they would be people that we'd want to work with, kind of knowing RAP coming into it. I think both of them would be good. I don't know if there's another small group that would want to meet and kind of get a feel for who to work with or make a recommendation to the rest of the board. I think on cost, I think the cost is going to be about a wash, which surprised me a little bit, but RAP put together kind of a agreement with MREA a few years back to discount what he usually charges for these types of things for MREA members. So I think that brought him back from city pricing into line with what Daler charges. So I think either one of them is going to be similar in price. Both of them use Morris Leatherman for their community survey. That's the phone polling thing. And they both were like, you got to do that. Because that's what gives you the kind of the confidence intervals of your probability of passing it if you ask for this much is this. Your probability of passing it if you ask for this much is this. And the stacking statistic is, if you ask for what that survey says you should ask for, your probability of passing it goes way up. And really, it sounds like Morris Leatherman is kind of the only one in that game that does that kind of thing. Don Lifto, who wrote the book that we're reading, he works for Morris Leatherman now. It used to be Baker Tilly, I think, if that name rings a bell for some of you. Mm-hmm. I mentioned admin. Both RAP and Daler, like I said, talked about got to have admin involved. They stack the deck. When admin is involved, the probability goes up like 75%. It's a significant deal. So, and both of them were on board with that. So I don't know in terms of selecting one of these two, if there's a, subcommittee that wants to get together. Melissa.
That's what I'm thinking. Is there a couple of people, I know we have, when the referendum came last time, a couple of people sat on a small committee, I think. And are there a couple of people who want to sit on a small committee to just at least kind of vet kind of the PR strategies, which ones might go best with our community? Couple of.
I do.
All right, 3, 10, all right. And like I said, is there anybody, the other question I might have is kind of a fist of 5, like how comfortable are we to keep going?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Right, yeah.
Like
before we even get to that, yeah.
So that you don't feel like you're out
Yep.
in front of us, but like kind of keep moving, keep exploring it before we make a commitment to, and then the group will come back and report back what their findings are.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah, that'd be good.
Fist of 5, like 5 being I'm completely comfortable, we're good, and 1 being like, let's stop here, I'm not comfortable. Can I see a fist of 5? All right.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay.
All
All right, so Julie, can you help wrangle that group then to coordinate a meeting with RAP and Daler? Then we'll get a kind of a little, I don't know, almost like an interviewee kind of thing, or they can do a little presentation, and then that subgroup will make a recommendation about who we should go with.
Yeah, so it'll be David, Mark, and Ben.
Okay.
Okay.
I worked with Todd many years ago with his business manager. Minnesota Power was trying to pull a fast one on valuation. So I went down to the cities, and he was a lobbyist for Excel and the cities.
Oh.
And so he gave a lot of support to defeat Minnesota Power's power play.
Interesting.
There's always history. There's always a political
Yeah.
history with that group.
Mhm.
Okay, I mentioned, so that Vista 5 kind of answers that first bullet. We've got the subcommittee, so I'm glad that Melissa was ahead of that. Then I think there's, the third thing that I would think would be useful is to get kind of a preliminary meeting with admin, and we could possibly wait till we get the second bullet thing squared away. But I don't know that it would be bad even to get together to talk now, just so that everybody knows, even at the board level, what we're working on.
I mean, at least you'd know at that point who the contacts are with Ed, Minnesota. I'm sure they all have them, but you want regional first and then.
And we, Matt, we're gonna sit down, you and I and Joe, so maybe that happens,
Yeah.
and then we get whatever from
Yeah.
admin at that point.
Yeah, okay. Does that sound okay to everybody?
If you want me in on that meeting. I
Okay.
can sit in.
All right,
If you just
Let's
want
do
somebody
that.
from the board.
let's do that. Sound good? Okay. All right, that's what I had. Anything else about that?
A lot of work on our plate.
Yep, yeah. The next 12 months are gonna be awesome. I'm just like,
So
They're gonna be
excited, so
amazing.
excited.
yeah. They're gonna be amazing. Yeah,
I hope your energy. keeps
Monumental.
coming.
what's that?
I hope your energy can fuel.
Yeah, they're gonna be monumental.
Yeah, no, I like that you're excited about the little diagram with all the little circles around it. It's like, we gotta run it right down the middle. It's gonna be great.
It's gonna be great. All right, any other business? All right, meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, everybody. That was
Thank
really
you.
helpful.
Matt sent me that diagram. Like, look at this. And I was just like,
I looked at it and all I could think of was,
oh my
oh
God.
my God, I would need to put a calendar together, like what needs to go first, who's leading what, what's the